So I've been a venture investor for the last 14 years, 15 years now. Invested in a lot of different kinds of things. And I've been getting comments and questions about like, hey, tell us about some of your investments, some of your favorite ones, and how you came to that decision. So today I thought I would tell you about one of my favorite investments, which is a company called Wyze, W-Y-Z-E. To understand Wyze and like why I love it, I gotta like backtrack a little bit. So when I've always been like super interested in consumer technology in general, but then also like really have liked Internet of Things, like just like the vision of like all the like cool things you could do with Internet of Things, like, you know, turn on lights and speak to devices and have things turn on and off automatically as you enter a room and all that stuff. I always thought was like super cool. I think like we even backed a company. Early on in my venture career, a company called Control 4, they made these like super high-end smart home automated products that were really for like the wealthy. And what was interesting is like there was Crestron at the time that was like for the super wealthy, and then like Control 4 was like for like the wealthy but not like super wealthy kind of thing. It was like they're broadening access to more people with their product, but it was still like 20 grand to do a Control 4 implementation, if I remember correctly. So, you know, you still had to be like fairly wealthy to put this in your home. But I was always intrigued with like this idea of like, hey, how can we get like really cool technology into our homes? But always felt like it was just like out of reach. It was too expensive. It was either like too expensive or didn't work well. Because the devices wouldn't like really talk to each other, and you had all these people that are like hacking things together with Zigbee and other like alternative wireless protocols, trying to drive the cost down, but then like, you know, they were kind of more hackers and they were like productized. And I remember backing there was this company on Kickstarter called SmartThings that ultimately got acquired by Samsung. But I remember backing them because I was like, this is so cool. Like they're driving down the price point of putting smart home technology in your house, because like for a couple $100 you could buy like all these devices and a central router and so forth. So anyways, this has always been like a huge passion of mine. And I've always felt like, hey, there are opportunities to make our homes a lot smarter than they are today, and more so than just like dropping in a Nest thermostat. Although, you know, like that is in a real way like kind of the gateway drug that like pulled a lot of people into IoT in general. You know, at the time I was like looking at all these smart devices and I was like, man, like 100, 150, $200. And especially back in the day, I was just like, that's like just a lot of money. And, you know, if I want to drop like 4 or 5 of these cameras around my house, for example, like all of a sudden I'm like $1,000, and that's just for the cameras, let alone like all the other sensors and everything else that goes into it. And so I always like just kind of felt kind of like frustrated, like it's either too expensive or doesn't talk to each other and work well. And I remember I was at Home Depot and I was walking down the aisle on my way out, and I looked down and there were these smart cameras for like $20. And I was like, no way, like these can't be like real, like they're not good cameras. But I was like, but how good do they have to be for $20? So I bought one right on the spot, went home, set it up, fell in love with it, was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And at that moment I was like, I need to find out who this company is and figure out how we can invest. And so what I did is I looked on LinkedIn, and I had one of my former students that I taught, he had gone to Stanford for his MBA, and I saw that he was connected to the CMO, this amazing marketer, Dave Crosby. And so I got him to make an intro, and I met with him and we chatted about some stuff, and then I got connected to the CEO, and Yoon's awesome. And I heard the story and the pitch, fell in love even more with this idea. And that was that like, I felt like there was this huge market of people that really wanted to invest in Internet of Things and bring that into their house, but couldn't afford to do it, right? Because, you know, IoT is like a nice to have, not really a must have in most cases. And so when you have a really high price point, it just makes it really, really challenging for it to become broadly mass adopted, even though I felt like the demand was definitely there. So what really intrigued me about Wyze is that they solved these like 2 big problems. One of like, it's too expensive, or 2, you could go with cheaper products, but they didn't really talk to each other. There was like super buggy, a lot of problems. And And they kind of sell both because they offered like this full suite of products that all work together, talk to each other, etc., and were just like really reliably built. But they were selling them at a price point that most people could easily afford. And so they were kind of solving that pain point from the consumer perspective, but you also have to solve it from a business perspective. Like you can't just give away dollars for 50 cents, as we joke in the industry, right? So sometimes like venture investors will pour millions of dollars into a startup, and then the startup will take those millions of dollars and they'll basically give the product away for free. And it's really hard to build a successful business that way. And so you, as a venture investor, you got to really understand that side of the business as well. Like if you're just giving away dollars for 50 cents, then of course everyone's going to come buy your products, right? And you'll grow super fast, but it doesn't mean you have a sustainable business. And what I learned about Wyze that's really interesting is like their whole thesis was, hey, you know what we're going to do? We are going to partner with some of the best hardware manufacturers out there, and we're going to create just really great rock solid products. We're going to co-develop that together. And then we are experts at Amazon. Like we know how to sell on Amazon. Like the whole team spun out of Amazon at one point. So they kind of knew how to play the Amazon game. We are going to sell this on Amazon, and we're going to sell it at a price point that's like unheard of, so that lots of people will talk about us in the PR world. So they get all of this free advertising from PR, right? They know how to play the Amazon game, so they're like the #1 camera on Amazon, even beating out Amazon's own product, which is called Blink, which is priced at a similar price point. So they drive all of this traffic, and then the way they really make money, right? Because if you have a $20 camera, you got to imagine like the margins on that product aren't super big because it just costs a lot of money to make these cameras. And their competitors were basically saying, okay, well, if it costs us, call it $20 to make one of these cameras. And sometimes the competitor cameras might have been like a little bit better, a little bigger, but only at the margin. So they'd be like, okay, if this camera costs us $20 to make, well, then we got to mark it up like 4 times that minimum. So all of a sudden you've got an $80 to $100 camera, right? Whereas Wyze was like, no, we're just keeping it at 20, and we'll use volume to drive our costs down even more. And then the way we're going to make money is in 2 ways. So one, we're going to encourage people to move over to our software business and buy subscriptions, right? So I get the camera, and then I want like dog detection, and I want package detection, and I want, I want to record, the video longer, and I want like all these additional features. Those features actually cost, once you've built the software, they don't cost that much. And so they could build this like really interesting recurring revenue subscription model that was really interesting. So people would go in, and for the first time ever, they could like build out their whole home with tons of cameras, tons of like devices like, smart locks, smart thermostats, et cetera, et cetera. They could build all of this out, have it all talk to each other, all through a central app, et cetera, et cetera. And then they really monetize it from like a gross margins perspective on their software. And people are happy to do it because all of a sudden, like I've got all these cameras, everything talks together, works together, and I want that increased functionality and storage, and so it just makes a ton of sense. And I think the other thing that Wyze did that was really smart is like their software isn't like super expensive, so it's very manageable to add on. So that's one way. And then the other way that they do it is that they have this broad range of products. And so, it's like, hey, I get the camera, I love the camera, it's great. And then, wow, they've got these like noise canceling headphones. They're like $40-50. If they're anything like the camera, they're probably pretty decent, and that's a crazy good deal. So they end up buying those, and it's like, oh, you have a smart scale, and you have a door lock, and you have a smart thermostat, and you have a sprinkler control system, and pretty soon you're like really dedicated to the Wyze brand, and you keep buying up all their other ancillary products. And so that's like, phase 2, or not phase 2, but like method 2 in which they drive additional revenue and profits. And then the third one is, and this is one that like I realized after time, like I didn't originally see this, but over time what I realized is because the price point is so low, and because Wyze comes out with a new camera every year, you can actually upgrade pretty affordably. Because if you think about like if you were on one of the competitors, you're on Arlo, you're on Ring, you're on Dropcam, like whatever, those cameras are like $100 to $200 a pop. And so they have to last a lot longer, in terms of like functionality and features. And so the advantage that Wyze has is like, yeah, maybe our camera, you know, when we release it isn't quite as good as the Arlo one, but we're going to release another one next year. And our customers, there's a good number of them that are going to come back and buy that camera. And then we're like the year after that, we're going to release the next one. And there's going to be even more customers that come back and buy that one. And the next, you know, you've got to buy like 5 cameras before you finally paid off that one from Arlo. And by the time that like, you know, people come back to say, you know, I'm going to buy another Arlo camera, it's now like 5 years old. And the Wyze cams are like so much better at that point, right? So it's like, it's really interesting because it's almost like a subscription model because people come back and they buy the new latest, greatest camera because they can afford to do so. So anyways, huge fan of Wyze and what they've built. You know, I'm obviously like a very passionate customer, and also probably even more passionate investor. I think they're really great. I will say, like, look, here are some of the downsides of investing in a company like Wyze. Like, they are a hardware product. Now, I like to think of them as like software masquerading as hardware because so much of like the true value gets monetized through their software platform rather than the hardware. But, you know, it is hardware. And so you've got things like when COVID happened and there were massive like supply chain shortages and everything. Like, fortunately, Wyze is like really good and on top of their supply chain, but it was challenging. You know, I think it was challenging for everybody to get enough product in stock and so forth, and there were shortages. The other thing is that like the joke in the industry is hardware is hard. It's hard to get right. It's very capital intensive. You know, it's like it's a physical good that you're shipping out, and so you got to have a lot of cash in hand to cover inventory and those types of things. So, you know, it does have a lot of challenges compared to like a pure play software where, you know, one new customer doesn't cost you like hardly anything, just a little bit of server space. Whereas a hardware product, like, no, there are real dollars going into that camera that you've got to, you know, you got to put up that money first so that the customer can come along and hopefully they buy it and then you make money on it. But if nobody comes to buy it, you're just out the money to manufacture the product in the first place. So it can be challenging from that perspective. I think like the other thing is that like, you know, security is always an issue. And so dealing with like different security threats can be a challenge. And, you know, I don't think any company in the world is immune to that. And so anytime you're dealing with like cameras in the home and so forth, like that can be a risk. And then, you know, I think the other thing too that you have to be cognizant about when investing in IoT and hardware devices is just this like speed of innovation and making sure that you're always at like the forefront of that so that you don't get left behind. And then lastly, like anytime you're selling a consumer products device, you really got to be good at marketing. I remember we looked at this company years ago called Contour. It was similar to the GoPro. Honestly, I thought it was better in almost every way. But the company itself and the team was just not as good at marketing as GoPro was, and ultimately went out of business because they couldn't really compete with the marketing machine that is GoPro. And so, you know, whenever I'm evaluating a consumer tech company or a consumer products company, like top of my mind is like how good are they at marketing, building a brand, and so forth. And one of the things that I really respect about Wyze is that they are phenomenal at being like some of the most scrappiest marketers I've ever seen. They pay almost nothing in advertising because they get so much great free press. And then Dave Crosby, you know, you should check him out on YouTube. His daughter is like this absolute like amazing singer and has done some amazing things, and definitely worth checking out as well. And, you know, he's brought a lot of that know-how to the company to help them really succeed. So huge fans of Yoon, the CEO, and Dave, the CMO, and everything they're building at Wyze. Tell me what you think down in the comments. Do you think it's a good investment, bad investment? I mean, we'll see how it turns out. You know, we haven't exited the position yet, so, you know, TBD, but so far we're loving it. And if you haven't checked out some of my other videos, be sure to check out the one where I dissect Robert from Shark Tank's track record. Thanks.